Welcome to Pallilo Points. I'm Brandon Strange of Sports Map Houston. That's Charlie Pallilo of ESPN 97.5 and 92.5. If you have not yet, please hit subscribe on the channel. We do appreciate it. Charlie, last week, Astros GM James Click said in an interview that, quote, "This roster is demanding our attention," end quote. And if last week it was demanding their attention, then Brooks Raley against the Mariners went full Karen and yelled to speak to the manager. When asked about some of the guys returning from injury, Click said they are not going to rely on those guys to be their deadline acquisitions. So, we talk about all the time about the farm system being depleted. There are still a few guys down there, but losing what you have left there will hurt. Guys like Corey Lee, Pedro Leon. If you lose those guys, your farm really is bare. Do you think the Astros will shoot those last bullets to shore up this pitching staff?
My guess is no, and neither is a high enough prospect in terms of Major League, but neither guy's a top 50 prospect in Major League Baseball. Maybe Leon's close, and while Lee has really hit well and looks like he should be their next starting catcher, to flat out deem him untouchable, not because he's what Fernando Tatis Jr. was or Vlad Guerrero Jr. was 2 years ago, but in the Astros system, you do need a source of cheap labor going forward, sustainability of your roster and a next generation of some young talent for the Astros. So I just would see those two guys as Astro untouchable, particularly for rental players. But that does not preclude the ability to go get a relief pitcher. The A's, whose farm system is graded as worse than the Astros, added a lefty reliever of quality, at least this season, in Andrew Chafin from the Cubs. There are a volume of relievers who can be had, and if the market is not saturated, at least it's pretty wet, well, then the cost for each individual reliever maybe is not through the roof. If there's fierce bidding for Craig Kimbrell, then maybe the Astros bow out or can't match the prospect quality. Right, if the fantasy of Max Scherzer becomes available is true, well, the Dodgers simply have better prospects that they can offer than what the Astros could put in play. But for a Raisel Iglesias or for a Richard Rodriguez, the Astros, whether it's the Hunter Brown types or one of the outfielders they've drafted in the last couple of years or a couple of those guys, I think they could launch a winning bid for some relief help. That is someone that you'd say, okay, not a sure thing or a first-tier closer, but just playing the percentages. Better than Brooks Raley, better than Andre Scrub, for heaven's sakes, better than Joe Smith, better than Brandon Bielak. The Monday night debacle in Seattle, you don't want to overreact to one game, but this is more than a one-game issue. That was just the crystallization of, what was Beyonce's song, Ring the Alarm, Sound the Alarm? The alarm is ringing and sounding by Friday, 3 o'clock. It would be a disappointment. Not catastrophe, but absolutely disappointment if James Click does not add to the bullpen, especially if, by his own words, the $12 million invested in Pedro Baez, who was supposed to be their impact bullpen acquisition, if he's a sunk cost for this year and you're not counting on him, then you need to go get someone by Friday, 3 p.m.
I want to talk about Kimbrell and Scherzer. You brought those guys up. Bet Online released trade odds this week, and they had better odds on Houston landing Byron Buxton, who we mentioned in a previous video last week. They had better odds on Houston landing him than either Kimbrell or Scherzer, and I'm sure that's just because of the price tag and the amount of cost that associated with landing those guys. But just in principle, is it a better use of the Astros resources to address that center field issue and, bring in maybe a position player and a pitcher, or should their resources be all directed at acquiring pitching?
This sliding scale, if you're telling me you're getting two relievers and you had access to an upgraded center field, the guy who's going to play every day for the most part, as opposed to someone who's going to throw maybe 3 innings per week as the second acquisition of that level, then I'd go for the everyday upgrade and one reliever, hoping that my bullpen would amount to Presley, the guy you add. Stanek is a 6th or 7th inning guy. I'm okay with him. He, to me, is just too wild and a little inconsistent to be your 8th inning primary setup guy. But if you can lengthen your bullpen, Christian Javier's been a little bit up and down, but certainly a viable arm. And then whoever the other guy from the rotation going to that bullpen is. So as long as I make one legit bullpen add, if there's an avenue to also improve over Miles Straw and a little bit of Chas McCormick in center field, without knowing exactly who the names are, I'd go everyday guy and the one reliever over two relievers.
If Baez comes back in and is able to make any meaningful impact into the bullpen, then how much will maybe a shortened rotation make a difference going into the playoffs when you don't have five-man rotations? How much will that play into their decision-making and into whether they do and how many arms they add?
If you have multiple inning guys down in the bullpen, right? Javier is one of those. Let's say it's Jake Odorizzi, not because he pitches poorly the last 2 months to get demoted from the rotation, but wow, they have 5 viable options, but you're never going to use more than 4 starting pitchers in a playoff series. You want to shorten the bridge, right? No matter who is in that bullpen, the only guy there you can trust right now on a consistent basis is Presley. Baez won't have enough work done as an Astro, I don't think, to say, all right, he's money in the 8th inning, right? Harkening back to days of Lidge and Wagner and Dotel, where you have 2-3 guys where if we're ahead after 6 innings, you feel like the game's over, we've won this one. That is not this Astro squad. I mean, they've given up 6 games this season that they've led after 7 innings. Now, they're like 49-6. It's not like the record is brutal, but they're pretty mediocre. And why the Astros in close games are very beatable. There's more randomness to close games. And if your bullpen other than your closer is iffy, so if you can shorten the bridge from starter to Presley because McCullers goes 5 1/3. No, he's at 109 pitches, so he has to come out. And if you can have Javier or Odorizzi go 2 2/3, that you're not pushing buttons, and each time you push a button, there's a chance the button malfunctions. And the buttons are pretty much everyone in that Astros bullpen right now, other than Ryan Presley. So if you can add one better button and one starter, well, then buttons are on plackets, right? Maybe the Astros placket can be reasonably positioned for the postseason.
It's interesting because we're seeing not just questions with the bullpen, but some of the starters. There's questions as to the amount of innings that they're going to carry. Guys like Garcia, who've never pitched this deep into a season. How much does that shortened season last year play into what we're seeing on the field with some of these issues with the pitchers, and how much that's going to play into the decision-making process on the part of James Click?
Yeah, I think the simple reality that there were no minor leagues, it hurt the year of development. And maybe if you're ramping a guy up who in 2018 threw 100 innings, in 2019, 115 innings, 2020, 125 innings, whereas it's like they skipped a grade, but without having the academic merits to skip the grade. And I think where it does hurt is that since you've lost guys injured along the way, right? Urquidy's been lost twice. So his workload has been reduced, and maybe he's fresher at the end of the year, but at what level is he going to pitch, and is he going to be healthy to begin with? Garcia's throwing more innings than they would have ever anticipated. You don't want to take Monday's fall apart in Seattle and think, oh, he's hit the wall. But Framber Valdez, it was awesome in his first 6 or 7 starts. His next 4, not so good. 6 no-hit innings against the Rangers, but he was wild, and, well, they're the Rangers, so I don't want to say Framber's back. So they have a lot of moving parts, and I think it probably goes to the last week of September where they decide, okay, here are 3 or 4 rotation guys. Greinke, McCullers, absolutely, unless something terribly goes wrong. I would think Framber's pretty solid for that 3rd spot. And then among Odorizzi and Urquidy and Garcia, there's only one more rotation spot. So 2 of those guys who are consolation prizes for the rotation, well, ideally, they'd be multi-inning options for that bullpen. So you're never going to the Bielacs and the Raley's. Blake Taylor, a little bit better than Raley, but certainly not someone you'd say, oh, he's money.